What's up, notJust developers? Welcome back to a new tutorial. Today, we're gonna build a flight price comparison application similar to Google Flights or Skyscanner. Our application will scrape the web for all the deals out there for price tracking and will display them in our application to show the best deals out there. The challenging part about this project is going to be how to get data, because there is no API for that. So we're gonna have to scrape the web, and that's gonna be the focus of today's video. It's gonna be very fun and something different, which I think you will love and will be very helpful for your career. So, in terms of the plan, we're gonna start from the client side. We're gonna build our mobile application using React Native and Expo, and we're gonna design the user interface. We're gonna work with custom components, and we're gonna see how to manage data using props and state. We're gonna implement some form management for our form here. We're gonna work with dates and date pickers, which is a very common feature in a lot of applications. And lastly, we're gonna see how we can implement data fetching to request data from a REST API. On the backend side, which is going to happen also in today's video by the end, so we're gonna see the full stack of this application in a couple of hours. The backend side, we're gonna build a REST API, a very simple actually REST API using notJust and Express. We're only gonna have one endpoint that will help us get data about prices for flights. For that, we're gonna implement data scraper with Puppeteer, and we're gonna see how we can do that, how we can navigate from our code to different websites, how we can parse everything to get the data that we need. And the most interesting part is going to be the data scraping at scale using BrightData. The challenge with scraping is that a lot of websites will block such activities, so we have to implement some things in order to be able to scale these solutions. With BrightData, that's going to be automatically, and it's very simple. We just have to connect our Puppeteer to BrightData, and then we can unlock any data on the web. But more about that a bit later. The whole architecture to have a clear picture in mind is going to be starting from the client side. We have a mobile application that is going to fetch prices from our backend, implemented in Express. And when we fetch prices, we actually trigger our scraper job that will use Puppeteer, connect through BrightData to a browser, and will go ahead and navigate automatically to some websites like Skyscanner, Kayak, Google Flights, travel.com, or any other websites that show information about flight prices. We'll do the search, and then we'll extract the data that we need and give it back to render and display it in our client side. Everything is going to be real time, so when the user searches something, it's going to take a couple of seconds until the data comes in, but everything is going to be live and real time, because that's what you need when tracking prices. Prices can change from minute to minute, so that's going to be the benefit of it. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's jump into it, and yeah. All right, so as always, before we get started, make sure to go ahead in the video description and open up, where is it? Open up the step-by-step guide link, or go ahead to our website under the projects. You're gonna find the latest project, Flight Price Comparison Application. This is important because this is the step-by-step guide I always prepare for you, so that you can easier follow along with me and implement this application together. That's the best way to actually learn something and implement, not just by watching, but by actually implementing. And if you're gonna get stuck at any point, you can always come back to the guide, read more information about all the steps, maybe compare with the source code from here. So in general, it's gonna help you along the way. And yeah, And the second step is to go ahead to download the asset bundle because it contains some dummy data, the presentation, and also I'm gonna include like some source codes at the end of the tutorial so you can compare it with the actual source that we're gonna write today. But we are ready and we will get started with our client-side application. So on the client side, we're gonna use React Native with Expo to implement this simple application. It's going to be a one-page application at this moment where we both search and see the results. So it's gonna be a real simple application. Let's go ahead in our guide and you can follow along right away. Where here you can follow along and copy the command to initialize your React Native application. I'm gonna do that here step by step. In terms of environment, when it comes to Expo, the only thing that you need is notJS installed, and you can install it from notJS website. And once you have that, you're also going to have access to the npx tool, npx. And npx allows us to execute commands, but the best part about it is that if it doesn't find that command or the package locally, it will go ahead and download it from npm registry. So what that means is that you don't have to have any package installed related to Expo. You just simply run npx create Expo application at latest to get the latest version of Expo. And here we can give it a name. But before that, I'm gonna navigate to my folder here. I may do a live, cd live. And only after that, I'm gonna do, should I zoom in even more? npx create Expo up at latest. Then let's give it a name, flight prices. Let's do up, flight prices up, and press enter. We're not gonna select any template. We're gonna go with a bare minimum to keep this part simple. I want to get faster to the data scraping part because that's the interesting step, and that's something exclusive to this project. So yeah, let's wait until our Expo application is created and installed. And while we're doing that, hello everyone who is joining live. How are you doing, guys? Rogelio, Dipesh, hello, hola. Sigma, hello. Where are you joining us from today? Let us know the geography of our live stream. I actually missed the live streams. There was, I think, 3 weeks that we haven't done one. I've been traveling for a week and a half, and then I had also a workshop in our private community that you can join at notjust.dev/pro. And yeah, for 3 weeks we didn't have a live stream, and I really missed this one. All right, so our Expo application is ready. What we have to do is go ahead and open it in our editor of choice. In my case, that's Visual Studio Code. So let's open it up here. I'm gonna move everything so that you can see. Just like that. And before we jump into the code, let's open a terminal from terminal, new terminal at the top. And let's go ahead and run the development server. I'm gonna do that with npm start. And we see that the port is, you shouldn't have a problem with that. And in a moment, we should see a QR code and the menu of Expo CLI. From here, what you can do is you can scan this QR code using the Expo Go application that you can download from App Store and Play Store on iOS and Android. And that would be the easiest way to run and see the application in practice. I don't have a phone here, and I want you to see as well, so that's why I'm gonna use an iOS simulator. Come on, where is it? Here. iOS. I'm gonna put it here. And we should already see, if everything is going well, we should see the text on the screen. And if we open the app.js file, which is the entry point of our application, we can go ahead and write here, instead of this text, hello world. And if we save and we see the changes on that device, that means that everything is working fine. I have some issues with VS Code telling me about this React, which is not actually an error, but to get rid of that, I'm gonna simply configure JS config file, and instead of React here, I'm gonna do React JSX. This is optional, you don't have to do it. I only did it to get rid of the red squiggly lines. Anyway, that means that we are ready for the next step. Give me just 1 second. Okay. And if we go ahead in our guide, the next step is the first step is going to be to implement and build our search form. So the search form is made up of a couple of inputs. At the top here, we have 2 text inputs for the airport where you're traveling from and the airport that you want to go to. And below that, we're gonna have some date pickers. Anyway, let's focus on the first 2 inputs, the text inputs, and then we're gonna look into the date picker. So we're gonna do everything. Should we do it in this file and then extract it to a separate component, or should we right away create and explain about the a separate component? I'm gonna actually go ahead and right away extract this into a separate component. As you can see, this search form in our application is part of application, and in order to keep the logic of the form close together and separated from everything else, it's advisable to do it as a separate component. This is how we can also keep our project scalable by splitting our code into small and reusable components. For that, we're gonna create a new folder called, let's go ahead and actually add the source folder, because I like to keep all the source code in the source directory. And inside that, we're gonna create a folder components. In the components folder, we can create a file for our search form. So let's do search form.js. And in this file, we're gonna define our custom component that will render a search form. What is a custom component? A custom component in React is a simple function. So let's call it search form, or maybe do it not with arrow, but with actual function. So we can do function search form. And what makes it a component is the fact that it will return some components that we want to render on the screen. For example, one of them is the text component that you can import from React Native, and we can use it here to say search form. Now, the last step is to export this function from the file, import it in our app.js and render it there. To export it, we can go ahead and add the export default before our function. And this way we can go back to our app.js and import our newly created component by importing search form from source, components, and search form. How do we render this search form? Well, similarly to how we render other pre-made components like a text or a status bar. We open the angle bracket, we write the name, search form, and if we don't need anything inside or any childs, we can self-close this tag. And just like that, we see the text search form here. I can go ahead and remove the hello world and leave only the search form in our app.js. And now we can go back to the search form and start implementing the actual form that we need to render here. All right, so that's basically the minimum code that you need for a custom component. It's a function that returns some JSX. Now I'm gonna add actually here some parentheses because our JSX will be a little bit larger. And the next step is to encapsulate this text to put it into a view. A view is a simple container similar to a div on web that will allow us to group together multiple components and to apply some styles. Well, speaking about styles, how do we do that? Well, we can apply styles by sending this style prop, and the styles prop expects an object that defines the styles. For example, if I say background color red, we're gonna see that the background color of this view became red. This way of styling the components is called inline styles, and it's okay for when you have like small components or minimal styles, but when you have like big files, it's advisable to separate the styles from the structure, from the JSX, in order to easier maintain and be able to read the code. To extract the style sheet, we are going to use the style sheet from React Native, and below the component we can define our styles using stylesheet.create, and here we're going to define an object with multiple style objects. We're going to give them a name that we choose. For example, for the view, we can call it a card or a container. And if I'm going to bring this background color to our card here, what we can do is we will replace this object. And here, if you are new to React Native, pay attention to the brackets here. At this moment, we have two of them because the first one opens the portal basically to the JavaScript, and the second one represents the object. Now, because we will use an actual object, we don't need the extra set of parentheses. We're gonna leave only the first ones, and we're gonna access styles.card. And just like that, we have the styles here red, and if I change to blue, it's gonna apply automatically. Perfect. Now, yeah, actually, I don't know, light gray or something like this just to see this form. What I want to do is I want to go back to our app.js and remove some of the styles from that top container, because it aligns everything inside it to the center and justifies to the center. So I will remove the align center in order to make sure that our components are stretched to fulfill the whole screen. And if you don't want them to be in the middle of the screen, we can also remove the justify content from here. The only problem is that now our search form went all the way to the top of the screen. On some phones, that's going to be okay, but on phones that have a notch, like an iPhone in this case, that is called unsafe area. That area basically is okay for images and so on, but for content like text and inputs and forms, that we should avoid rendering things there. In React Native, we have a component safe area view that helps us add some padding to a container in order to avoid content being displayed behind the notch. How do we use that? We use that by simply wrapping or changing this view to I'm gonna actually wrap our search form in the safe area view like this but it should be opening and closing at the end. And this way the search form is rendered inside the safe area view, and now it's not behind the notch, just below it. Perfect. We're moving along quite well. What I want to do here in the card, probably don't need anything, or just I will leave the background color light gray just to see some information there. It's helpful with a background color, especially when you're working with positioning and spacing. For example, if we need to add some spacing around this container, we're gonna add a margin. And with a background color, when adding margin, we're gonna see the effect of a margin, and that's exactly what we wanted. If you want to add space inside the container, that's padding, and if I add padding 10, that's gonna add some space there. You can also make the corners or the corners of a container round by using border radius. And if I choose a 10 as well, that's gonna be something like this. For the padding, I think I can go more, 15, that's okay. What I did here with the card is actually I applied some shadow, which makes it look much better. And I never remember like all the properties for the shadow, but I always go to React Native Shadow Generator, which is a nice, very simple tool that has only a slider. You can define how much shadow you want, and then you can copy all of these properties. So I can comment it shadows. This is all, of course, optional, but it will look much better like this. And instead of light gray background, I can go back to white. It has like some shadow. It looks nice. Why it has so many properties? Well, for Android, you need elevation, but on iOS, you need all of these properties. So that's why we have so many things just to create some shadow. Okay, so let's move on. We have a container, we have a text. The text is going to be our title. So we can say something like search the best prices for your next trip. You can give some style here like styles.title, and inside our style sheet, after the card, at the end here, we can also define some styles for our title. For example, what should be the title? I would like to center it in the middle. So for that, I'm gonna use an align self-aligning in the center. Okay, that's good. We can adjust the font weight, which is, if we want to make it bold, we can simply say bold here, or we can also use some numbers. For example, bold is going to be 700. If you do 500, that would be a semi-bold, or 600, for example. No, I think 5 is okay. And you can also increase the font size. The default is 14. I can increase it to 16 to say that this is a title. And yeah, I think that's okay. Next step, if we look at our UI, the next step after the title and the card is going to be 2 input boxes. Let's go ahead and see how we can work with text inputs in React Native. To do that, we have a text input component that we can import from React Native, and we can render it just below this text. So text input is going to be a self-closing tag, and we're going to manage everything about that text input through the properties. We don't see anything on the screen, but actually the text input is already there. If you want to see it, if you want to see it there, we can add a placeholder saying what's going to be the placeholder from, and it's right there. We already see the from. We can write something there. Well, let's go ahead and add some styles in order to provide some better visual styles for our input. And I think we can duplicate this one more time for the to airport. Perfect. Let's go ahead and define the styles for our input. Input is going to be, well, I'm going to start with a border color. That's very similar to background color. It helps us position and add spacing. So border width 1 and border color gray is going to show us how much space is our input taking on the screen. And from here we can add, for example, padding 10. We can add margin only vertical because we don't need margin on the horizontal. 10 might be too much. 5. You can also do border radius to make corners round, like 5, if you want them. If you want that. And I think the border color should be even less gray. And there is a color called Gainsborough. I'm using these shortcuts for colors. You don't have, you can actually use hex colors, like, I don't know, AAA. But I remember a couple of them, and that's helpful, like for very fast giving some colors. And yeah, that's good. I think the title should have some margin, vertical 10 to have more space between the title and the inputs. 15. Yeah, 15 can be okay. Okay, that's good. The next step is let's go ahead and add a button. A button, we can either use a pre-made component button from React Native. For a very simple button with a title, let's say search, and this is going to render a native button. So on iOS it looks like this because that's how buttons look on iOS. On Android it's going to look differently. I rarely use the button component. Most of the times I'm implementing my own buttons with my own style using a pressable component, and this is a simple view where we can put the text inside and add some styles. But for the simplicity of this tutorial, I'm going to simply use this button because it does its job. Now, when we press on a button, we will call a function. The function that we want to call is on search. On search pressed, or how is it going to call? On search press. And here we can go ahead and say console log searching for, and at this moment we don't know for what. Besides declaring the function, we need to assign it to the on press event of a button. So on search press. Now, if I'm gonna open the debugger and press search, we should see this text, searching for. Alternatively, instead of console log, you can do console warn, and this will show here on the screen as searching for, because that's what we're console logging. Now the question is, how can we get the data from our text input here? Because we will need it in this function, and we need to know like what is the user actually typing here. Well, at this moment we cannot, because at this point these text inputs are uncontrolled inputs. Basically, the data is managed by the text input, not by us, not by this component. In order to create a controlled component, we need to bind a state variable to the text input. It sounds probably more complicated than it actually is. All we have to do is we have to define a state variable. I mean, two state variables because we have two text inputs. And we do that using the useState hook from React. And inside our function at the top, we define the state using useState like this. The useState hook helps us create a state variable, and a state variable is a simple variable in React that whenever we change, it will re-render the component to display on the screen. So it's a smart variable that reflects and updates and makes our application reactive. When we use the useState hook, it returns us an array with two values. The first one is the actual value of the state, and we're gonna call it, let's say, from. And the second one is a function, is a setter. So usually we call it the same name with a prefix set from. Let's go ahead and duplicate the same state variable for the second input, the 2 and set 2. The value that we give to the useState here is the default value. Now, for example, if I say here default, you're gonna see the value in a moment. Now, what we have to do is the value of the state we need to send to the value of the text input. This way we say from. This is the value of our state. We send to the value of the text input. This way we are telling text input always display what we have in state. So that's why we see default here. Also, that's why if I'm gonna try to type something here, it's not gonna allow me to do that. For the second one, which is still uncontrolled, it allows me. Why the first one doesn't allow? Because we always say, whatever you're doing, the value should be the value from our state variable. And because we never update the from state variable, it's never gonna update here. To make sure that we always also update the state variable, we need the second bind. The first one is sending to the text input value, and the second one listening to whenever the text input changes the text, we want to change the state variable. So it's as simple as sending a on change text function here, which is a function that will be called with a new value. So we can simply send the setter here. For example, new value, we will call the set from using the new value. Now it says default, but I can type things and they will update in our state. And that means that when calling a function like search, we can say searching for the variable from. Now, I don't know, let's say TFS, search, we see the value here. I wrote it this way for you to understand that onChangeText expects a function and it will send the updated text, and using that updated text we call the setter of our state, which is also a function. But this can be simplified. Whenever you have like a function that calls the same that calls another function with the same variables, what we can do is simply send the original function there, just like that. And it's actually very, very simple. Value from onChangeText, the setter. And it will work as it was working before. Now, for the second one, the same thing. The value is going to be our state variable 2, and the onChangeText is going to be set 2. Now we have two text inputs, both of them are controlled. We can track them in state and we can use them when the user presses on the button. I'm gonna revert back to empty string here, and with that we have our basic form with two inputs, from and to. I'm gonna go ahead and do a git add, git commit, so that if you're gonna look at the source code afterwards, you're gonna be able to check the commits and compare them. And let's say basic search form. The next step is going to be to implement the date inputs. And the date inputs, yeah, for that we're gonna use an external package. But let me check, how are you guys doing? If you're following along, if you have any questions so far. Hello from Dubai, hello Bula Munet. Marvin, hello, how are you doing? Hungary, mate, hello. Hello from UK, from Philippines. Barat, Chile, New York, Canas, USA. Hello, guys. Arpit is excited for the web scraping part. Joining from India, are we going to scrape using BrightData? Yes, we're gonna scrape using. We're gonna use Puppeteer for the scraping part, but we're gonna use BrightData for the proxy network and for the browser that will basically unlock any website and will allow us to do the scraping part. I'm also very excited about that part. So yeah, we're gonna get there, I think, in 30 minutes. I hope to finish with the front-end part in 30 more minutes, and then we go into the data scraping part. Hello from Nepal, Argentina, Portugal. Hello everywhere, guys. Republic of Congo, Chile, Kenya. Okay. As I said, let's go ahead and continue this search form. And the next step is going to implement the date pickers. For the date pickers, we're going to use an external library. And if you scroll down a bit to the date inputs, we're going to use the React Native Community Date Picker. This is a library that allows us to open a model and select a date. I think there was also a demo here. Yeah, the screenshots, how it looks on iOS and how it also looks on Android. And yeah, let's go ahead and start that by installing this library. I'm going to copy the npx expo install and the name of the package. Let's open a terminal. And we have our Metro bundler running. All we have to do is open a new terminal by pressing on the plus sign. And here we can go ahead and install the React Native Community Date Time Picker. Okay, in our search form, I'm gonna go ahead and import date time picker from React Native Community Date Time Picker. Now, below the text inputs that we already have, but above the button, let's go ahead and render the date time picker. The date time picker requires, I think, has a required property called value. And we can say new date, which is going to be today's date. All right, so we already see the date time picker and we can already open it, select something, and so on. The thing is that it's not yet controlled, similarly to our uncontrolled inputs. So that means that at this moment we cannot get the value that the user selected. In order to do that, we have to define two more state variables. One of them is depart date and set depart date, which we can initialize with new date, which is going to be today's date. And let's do also const return date, set return date. And this is going to be a state variable. We can also initialize it with new date. Now we take this depart date and we send it to the value depart date here. But that's only one way binding. For example, if I'm going to change, I'm not sure. Yeah, it still displays that, but it doesn't update in our state variable. It remains the initial value. To update in the state variable as well, there is a function called onChange, which in date picker, a property onChange that expects a function with two parameters, the event, and the second one is the new date. We don't care that much about the event, but we care about the updated date. So what we should do is use this date and set it in our state using set depart date with date. Yep. Well, this date can also be undefined, and that's why even though we're writing JavaScript, my TypeScript is getting out of hand and telling me that, hey, this date can also be undefined, but we expect it only a date. So alternatively, you can do like date, or if date is undefined, today's date. So a newly created date. And this way, it's either that date that the user chose, or if user didn't choose anything, it's gonna reset to current date. We can do the same for the second one. And the second one is going to be about return date and set return date, just like this. There are also different properties in this library that you can adjust. So you can look at different modes, the display type, and so on. For example, what I'm interested in is in a property called minimum date, because in the departure date, I don't want to be able to choose a date in the past. For example, in May, right? It doesn't make sense when searching for flights. So the minimum date will be today's date, which we can create using a new date. And the minimum date of the return date should actually be, so for the return date, we don't want to be able to select a date before the departure date. So I'm gonna say minimum date is depart date. And this way, if I choose here 26, in the second one, I'm not gonna be able to choose 25. I'm gonna only be able to choose later dates. And if I'm gonna update to 11th here, it will update in the second one as well. Is today 20th? No, it's 6. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. The last step with these date time pickers is going to be to style them. As you can see in our user interface, where is it? We put them into a same container that looks like a normal text input with some borders, and we put them in the same line, in the same row, not one on top of each other. So for that reason, we have to put a view, or to wrap these two components into a view. Let's do that just like this, view, and the closing tag should be after the second date picker. This way, the two date pickers are part of this view, which we can style and call it styles.datePicker. Let's take this name, and in our styles, let's go ahead and actually style it. Well, we can use some styles from the input, for example, the border width and the border color, and probably the padding. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, we already see that. Probably the border radius as well, to make it round, to look identical, and maybe the margin vertical as well, to have a same space between them. Okay, it looks like a normal input with borders and so on, but we want to render the childs, or everything inside our date picker view, we want to render in the same row. To do that, we can adjust it using flex direction row, and this will put the two date pickers in the same row, just like this. And I think in this situation, padding can be smaller, like 5, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's good. In our user interface here, we also added an icon from Expo icons, Expo vector icons, which is pre-installed in our application, and we can search for calendar We can choose the one that we like, for example, this one. Not sure which one we used there, but I think it's the same, yeah. So you just copy the import statement, put it at the top of a file, and copy the rendering part, and let's put it inside our date picker view before the first date picker, just like this. And with that, we have an icon there. We can display it with a gray color, not black. For the size, we can even increase it a bit. And I think that's good. Another thing that we did is between the two date pickers, we put a pipe. And it's quite simple to do that using a text and actually writing this straight pipe, like how is it called? The straight line, vertical line. And yes, at the moment it doesn't look perfect, but we're gonna, with a bit of styles to this text, we can do, I don't know, increase the font size to 20. We can decrease the color to Gainsborough. And we can add some margin to the left, 10, to have the same spacing on the left and on the right. And yeah, well, the last micro step that we can do is the whole view date picker. If we add a component align items center, that's gonna horizontally center the items. Horizontally? Yeah, they will put it on the same horizontal line. Because we found that there is like very small difference there, which I don't like. And I think with that, we are done. Now, when we press on this search, let's console log all the data that we want to search for based on, from, to, depart date, and return date. And if I do here TFS, I don't know, Madrid, and here change some dates. If I press search, we see in the console an object with the departure date, which is 12, exactly what we selected. From TFS, the return date is 20th, and the 2 is Madrid. Why? I'm wondering one thing. Okay, that's how it works. All right, perfect. So that was our date pickers. For our search form, I'm gonna go ahead and do git add, git commit, date picker. Now we're ready for the next step. And the next step is going to be our form. But before we do the form, let me give you a small bonus of a very simple thing, a very unnecessary thing in the grand scheme of things, but that will make our application just a little bit better looking. And here I'm talking about a linear gradient. I'm not sure if I documented it here, that's why it's a small bonus. So what we can do is linear gradient React Native. Is it this one from Expo? Yes, Expo linear gradient. Let's go ahead and install Expo linear gradient and use it as the background of our application. This is optional, like if you don't want to do this, you can skip it and everything is gonna work as it was working before. Let's go ahead and do npx expo install Expo linear gradient. And we can use it in our app.js. We're gonna use it instead of the root view. So let's go ahead and first import linear gradient from Expo linear gradient. Let's use it to replace the root view and make sure it also replaces the closing tag from a view to a linear gradient. And we, besides the style, we need to send there the colors. The colors is an array of colors. For example, you can go from red to blue, which will look very bad, but at least it will prove a point. And just like that, we have a background with a linear gradient. You can add more colors to this array to achieve the gradient that you like. You can also adjust the rotation of a gradient and so on. The way I chose it, where is it? Let me find the linear gradient from white to this color, right? So from white at the top to a very light blue at the bottom. You can choose like even other colors, like more fun colors. But yeah, it's already looking much better rather than all white background. Like this. White, boring. With some linear gradient, muy bueno. Perfect. That was the little bonus for you. So let me git add, git commit, linear gradient background. Perfect. Hello from Gabon. Hello from Nigeria. How are you doing, guys? Can you prepare the backend using Expo API routes rather than Express routes? In future, that's going to be possible. Right now, the Expo API routes are still an RFC. It's still upcoming. I don't think it's available yet. So starting from Expo router v3, we're going to be able to define these API routes instead of having an Express backend. Yes, that's true. Hello, Oliver. How are you doing? Anyway, let's go back to our project and we're going to continue. The next step is going to be our list of options or list of flights. If we look in our guide, scroll down a bit, we're going to see the flight prices list. What we want to do is to render a list of options with information about that. The information that we care about is the price and the information like the time of departure and the return time. Maybe additionally we can also say what airline is the flight managed by. So all in all, we're gonna have a list with these components. Before, like in a moment, also in this video, we're gonna get this data from our backend by scraping the internet for the best flight prices. But before we do that, let's go ahead and use a JSON file that I prepared for you that looks like a result that we will get later from our backend. Let's first use that to have a user interface ready, and then we can move on and focus on the backend and on the data scraping. So for that reason, go ahead and from the asset bundle that you downloaded, you can also find the link in the description below. Let me also find that. Unzip the folder, and where is it? Live streams. Here, the bundle. There should be the data.json file. Go ahead and either drop it in the assets or right away in the root directory. I'm gonna do it, yeah, basically in the root directory like this, just to keep it simple. Because later on we're gonna delete it. So here what do we have? We have an array of objects. Every object is one option. It includes the price and the details for the departure and return flights. So this is going to be a very similar response that we will receive from the backend. Now let's go ahead in app.js. Let's import data from .data, right? Maybe it will say that it cannot find it, but I don't think we need to care about, because it will find. You can also get rid of that issue, I think. Cannot find where. gsconfig resolve JSON module true. Yeah, it's still gonna work, and I will show you in a following. I will show you now. So what we want to do is let's first of all try to render one item from there, because data.json is an array of options. Let's go ahead and take the first option. So option 1 is equal to data at position 0. Now, below the search form, but also in the safe area view, let's give some space here, and we can render a text input here using the option.price. If we do that, we need to make sure to import the text from React Native. We're gonna see the price there of the first option. If you want to get rid of this squiggly bracket, you can do that through the JSON config here. And I think that was something like JSON, resolve JSON module, true. And from app.js, come on, should I do JSON? Yeah, now it works. Okay, perfect. So we have a data. Now we have to build the component that will render this option. I recommend us not spending a lot of time on implementing the component that will render one of these flight option. And in order to get faster to the data scraping and the backend part. So here from the guide, we can get the code for the flight option. We can look into it and I will explain you what it does, but it simply takes some data and renders this component. So let's go ahead and get the code for our flight option item with all of its styles. And inside our components, inside our source components, let's create a new file, flight price option.js. Let's paste the code, it's flight option item, sorry. So let's keep the same naming, flight option item. And yeah, let's first render it, and then I'm gonna go back and show you how it was built. In our app.js, we can go ahead and import the flight option item from our source components. And we can go ahead and instead of this text, we can render the flight option item, and we will send the data as the flight property. So flight property is going to be option 1 here. And just like that, we have a flight option here. And if you change it to option 2, you're going to see that the data automatically changes. You see? Because it's coming from different data in our array. Now, if we look at the flight option component that we have imported, it's quite simple. It has a lot of views just because of how everything is structured. Basically, at the end, it renders the price. This is on the most right part. Then we have a view that contains everything here on the left. I probably messed up right with left, but you understand my point. Now inside this line, we have 2 routes, basically 2 identical routes. And for every route, which is 1 line here, we render the departure date and the arriving time and also the airline. Between them we have a simple icon, and that's basically everything that we're displaying here. If you want to, but yeah, don't worry about that. Now that we can render in our app.js one item, let's go ahead and render a list of them. To do that in React Native, we have a component called flatList that we can import from React Native. And I'm gonna delete, or yeah, let me actually delete or comment out the rendering part of one option, because instead of rendering one option, we will render all of them using a flat list. So flat list, an opening and closing tag, it expects two required properties. One of them is data, and the data is going to be actually our data from JSON. And the second parameter is the render item. Render item is a function that will tell flatlist, how do you want me to render one piece from this array of data? How do we want to do that? Using a flight option item that we just created. However, this flight option item expects some data about the flight. Where do we get it from? We get it from the function parameters here, and we destructure it as the item. So the item is going to be one single item in our data.json. So for the first one, it's going to be this object. For the second one, it's going to be the second object, and so on. So we take this item and we send it to our flight option component. And just like that, we have a scrollable list of items on the screen. Maybe we can give it a style flex one. Let me see how that will work. Content container style. No, it doesn't want. It's okay. What you can do with this flat list, you can also, for example, hide the scroll indicator. I don't think that's very necessary, but it's much cleaner like this. And just like that, we have a list of flight options. And I can go ahead and do git add, git commit, flight price options list. All right, so at this moment we have our application ready, and actually what we can do is to simulate how everything is gonna work. For example, in our application, instead of sending data right away there, yeah, let's do that right now, because we will need a way to connect, the event of user pressing this button with actually sending a request and then receiving the items and displaying them in a list. The thing is that our data, or the data that the flat list depends on, is in our app.js. So that means that the state with the items is should live here. So set items. This is going to be our flight option items that we will fetch from the server. Use state. Initially, it's going to be an empty array. Now, instead of sending here data, we're going to send items. Initially, there will be no items. Then the user will press search, and only then we will receive from the backend items, and we will update the state variable in order for the flat list to update. For that reason, we will need here a function called onSearch, and we are going to send one search, and the one search should also expects also some parameters, because we will need to know the data that we want to search. So for example, data here. And this function, how do we call this function? or when do we want to call the onSearch function? We want to do that when the user presses the button. This button is rendered in a child component here in the search form. Let's open that as well. I'm gonna close others to have only the app.js and the search form. So in the search form, we have a button. When we press on it, we actually don't want to do anything here. We want to call a function in the parent component app.js. To do that, we can simply send the function down to the child component through the properties, because a function is nothing else than a variable that points to a function. So we can say that search form will receive a property called onSearch that will have a value of this function. Now, on the search form, we can receive it through properties here by name, and the name that we use for the parameter is onSearch. And what we can do is when we press here, we can call this onSearch function by sending all of this data. Now I'm not gonna console warn anything here, or actually I'm gonna copy it from here, but move it to app.js to make sure that we actually receive some data here and everything is connected. Now, if I'm gonna do here, I don't know, TFS, MAD, and press search, we see again this console warn with all the data, but this time this is in our app.js because that's where we will do the fetching and we will save the items. For example, get items from the backend, and then set them in state. Now we can simulate the set items in state using dummy data from our data.json. And initially it's not gonna have anything, but after we press search, it still doesn't work. Set items, data. And here it's items. Why? Let's do it before rendering. Let's return items. So if I do search, oh, okay. The data as the parameter is has the same name as the data. So when we import the dummy data with the answers, I'm gonna call them dummy data. And I'm gonna use it to set in the state. Because this is search data and this is the result. Now, I can remove this one as well. Reload, come on. Yeah, David, thank you very much for mentioning that. It was the same name, yeah. Let's run it again, see it in action. And initially it's not gonna have anything. If we write something and then search, it's gonna be populated with the data from our dummy data, but in the next step, we're gonna actually fetch these items from the backend. Perfect, now our data is managed here at the app level, and both the search form and the flat list has access to the items and the onSearch event. I'm gonna go ahead and commit this. search events. Menuonda, hello, thank you. What's happening? Come on, git add, git commit. Perfect. All right, so with that being said, our front end, our mobile application for the flight tracking use case is done, is finished, and is ready for us to implement in the next step by fetching real data. So we are starting the second part of our project, and this is going to be the backend side. During this part, we're gonna set up a notJust server. We're gonna implement a scraper using Puppeteer. We're gonna use BrightData to connect to a safe browser for scraping. And we're gonna scrape data from different sources about flight prices. And this way we will integrate by the end with the application that we just built to display them to the user. First of all, let me explain how and why, how everything is going to work. Application like this, like a price comparison application, this application depends a lot on data from different sources. This data can be from other price aggregators, like for example, Skyscanner, that is doing basically the same thing. It scans and scrapes the internet for the best deals out there. Or you can also integrate directly with airlines. This is a very common use case, and the challenge here is how to get data. Because airline websites or Skyscanner and other websites, they usually don't offer an API for this stuff. They don't want you to have access to the data, they want you to use their services. That's where web scraping comes into play. Whenever we cannot get the data through APIs, SDKs, or some other ways, we are left with the solution of scraping the internet. How does that work? It works by implementing a bot that will simulate the activity of a person, for example, going to Skyscanner, and then looking at the HTML and extracting only the data that you need. The challenge with web scraping is to overcome all the measures that websites put in place to prevent people from scraping the internet. For example, big websites like Amazon, Skyscanner, and any other website, they have solutions in place that very easily detect if you are a bot and if you are scraping the site. A little story that I remember when I first found out about this is back in university, me and Lucas wanted to build an automation tool for Instagram, and when doing that, we had to use some scraping tools. We coded everything. Lucas coded the application on the front end, the dashboard. I was working on the scraper. Everything was working fine, like locally. The scraper was working perfectly. We deployed it. I think we even got the first 2 clients. And the second day, we find out that our IPs and our servers are banned from scanning this because Instagram was very easily detected that what we are doing is not based on their terms. And they basically detected that from the same IP address, we're sending multiple requests to their website, so they don't want that. That's where BrightData, the sponsor of today's video, comes into play. With BrightData, you can scrape the web using their proxy network, and in simple words, what that means is every time you're gonna connect to a website to scrape, BrightData will use a different IP address for that request, and this prevents websites from detecting that this is a scraper. So this is crucial tool for being able to scale a scraper to meet the requirements. And I think if I knew about BrightData when building that project, it wouldn't have died because it was a really great automation tool that a lot of people could benefit out of it. But I was stopped by not being able to scale it beyond running it locally. So, yes, BrightData has a lot of solutions out there to help you scrape and use the proxy network, scrape the web, unlock data that otherwise would not be possible to get using a lot of helpful tools. But what I'm interested in, we're going to use specifically the scraping browser, and you're going to see how we can benefit of it in a moment. We partner with BrightData for this tutorial, so every Node.js developer will get $50 free credits if you sign up using our link. You can see it here on the screen. It's also the first link in the description below. Go ahead, open it up, sign up for an account. You're gonna receive right away the free credits, and we can get started with BrightData. You can sign up using your Google account. That's probably the easiest way. And after that, you're gonna go to the dashboard. From the dashboard, we are interested in the first option here in the side menu for the proxies and scraping infrastructure. BrightData is known for a very large network of proxies, which are basically IP addresses that you can use to scrape the internet and so on. From this page, go ahead and scroll down until you will see the scraping browser. I already have one, so that's why I don't see it in this list, but it should look something like this. Scraping browser, press on the Get Started, and in my case, I'm gonna go ahead and press the Add Scraping Browser, because this is the second one, and we can give this scraping browser a name. For example, Flight Tracker or Flight Prices. Let's go ahead and press Add. Are you sure? Yes. And just like that, we have set up our scraping browser. In the access parameters, here is the details about how we can connect to this browser. And we can connect to this browser using different scraping tools, open source tools out there that are available. For example, in our case, we're going to use Puppeteer, but we're going to talk about that in a moment. What we actually need first is a notJust application. Let's go ahead and actually here on our scraping browser, have a look at some documentation. If you scroll down, you'll see checkout code and integration example that has a very easy getting started guide for multiple languages, Node.js, Python, C#. I'm going to choose Node.js, and for multiple scraping libraries. For example, Puppeteer, Playwright, Selenium, and so on. Actually, I remember when we did that, we used Selenium. But for this one, I'm going to use Puppeteer. And as you can see, it shows us how to install the Puppeteer and how we can connect to the browser. But as I said before that, we actually need, first of all, to have a backend, a simple Node.js backend. That's very easy to create. Let me create a new web page here. Let me go ahead and open an iTerm. I'm gonna navigate to my projects, live, and here, what I'm gonna do is, let's go ahead and simply create a folder called Flight Prices Backend. Make dir. Let's go ahead and navigate to that directory that we just created, backend, and here we can initialize an empty Node.js project. To do that, we can use npm init and then -y to select all the default answers. And just like that, if you do ls, we should see the package.json, which makes this folder a Node.js application. Let's go ahead and also open this one inside Visual Studio Code. You can open it in a new window. I don't need the terminal anymore. Here is going to be our Node.js, our backend using that now has only the package.json. We don't need anything else at this moment, empty folder with package.json. And the next step, we can go ahead to our BrightData, to the code examples. And if you're not there, I'm going to show you how you can go there. You can go to proxies, then choose the scraping browser based on your name, and here check out code and integration examples. We're going to use Node.js and Puppeteer, and the first step is to install Puppeteer. Let's copy it, go to our Node.js application, and install the Puppeteer core. I'm going to also open the documentation of Puppeteer. And yes, like if you, basically at the end of the day, most of the things that we are doing here depends where what you should learn is the Puppeteer. The BrightData is as simple as connecting to a browser. Everything else is the open source library Puppeteer, or if you're using Selenium or other browsing browsing library that's of your choice. So here you're gonna look through a lot of documentation, like how you can open pages, how you can navigate, and so on. We're gonna find out more about that throughout this tutorial, but I wanted to show you where you can go for documentation, or if you have some questions. Now, after we install the Puppeteer core, in the package.json, that should be here under the dependencies. And we can go ahead back to BrightData. And here is the Node.js example of a code that we can use. Let's go ahead and copy this code, come back to our project, to our backend. Let's create a new file called scraper.js and paste the code here. We're gonna look in a moment what it does here, but what we can do is we can open, what I want us to do right now is to execute for the first time this scraper. To do that, open the terminal and write node scraper. We see connecting to scraping browser, and so on and so on. And after that, what we see is some HTML with h1 example domain and some text. This domain is for illustrative examples in documents. Why do we see this? Let's look at the code. What we are doing here is at the top in our main function, we are using Puppeteer to connect to our remote browser. The remote browser is the BrightData's browser, the browser that is running on the infrastructure and premises of BrightData. This way, that's basically the only part where BrightData comes into play. The rest is handled by the Puppeteer, but the hard parts of unlocking and proxies and so on is handled here behind the scenes magically. Now, what we are doing is we are going to a new page and we are navigating to the example.com. And after we navigate there, we take the HTML content of a page and we are console logging the HTML content. So that's why in the console here we see basically the HTML from the example.com website. Another way that we can look at, we can have a better understanding of what's happening behind the scenes is probably going to be debugging and taking screenshots. screenshots. There is the page screenshot method. And where is it? But yeah, I'm not gonna do the screen. I'm not gonna do now the screenshot. For now, I will show you another way that we can have a look at what's actually happening behind the scenes, because at the moment, like, we basically understand that the scraping, what happens with scraping is there is a browser that actually goes to, for example, example.com. It opens it, it waits for the website to load, and after that it tries to parse everything. So there is a there is a process behind the scenes that is happening, and for us to be able to develop our scraper, it's crucial to have an understanding of what's happening behind the scenes so that we know what should be the next step to implement there, what buttons to find, what inputs to search, and so on. So at this moment, as I said, based on maybe our documentation, it's important to understand that the browser that is being used to actually navigate and so on, this is an actual browser with a graphical user interface. It's not a headless browser, but the difference is that the browser is not running on your local machine. The browser is running on BrightData. It's a remote browser because it needs to be that way to be able to avoid being blocked by the website. Every time we connect to the BrightData, we get a different IP address, and we can also basically overcome CAPTCHAs and other methods to prevent that. So because it's remote, we cannot magically open it here, but we can connect to using the dev tools to that page so that we can see what's happening behind the scenes. BrightData in their documentation has an example of that. So if I'm going to go back here, below this there is a Chrome DevTools debugger. Let's open it up and let's go ahead and press this link, getting started. This will redirect us to the documentation, and here we can look at how we can get started. We already have done that, and the example for notJust Puppeteer, let's open that up. It shows the same code for connecting to the browser, and below that it also shows us how we can automatically open DevTools to view our live browser session. So what I'm gonna do is let's copy this code from here, from the documentation. Let's go to, wait a second. Let's go to our code, and I think I want to create a separate file for it. Yeah, let's go ahead and separate this code to a separate file called utils.js, and let's paste everything here. But it shouldn't be this one. I don't think I copied it correctly. It should be this one with exec and so on. Did it copy? No, it didn't copy, so I have to manually copy it like this. So this utils, there is this function open DevTools, and everything below the function we're gonna comment out because that's not exactly the way we're gonna connect to it. What we have to do is we have to export these DevTools using module.export open DevTools. And basically in this code, we saw how we can open the DevTools by connecting to the page and the client. Now, we know that our page and the client is inside our scraper.js. So let's import this open DevTools in scraper.js. Let's do const destructure open DevTools equal require these utils. Now, again, here we need to see the Open DevTools expects the page and the client. In the scraper, we see that we created the page. And before we navigate, let's go ahead and add some spaces here. Open DevTools. So I'm gonna copy this code. Which code? Let's copy all the comments here to the scraper and understand what do we need and what we don't need. For example, the page go to, we definitely don't need because we have it twice. The page we don't need because we created it here. We already created it. But the client is something that we still don't have. So to open the DevTools, we're gonna click create the client based on the page and call the function Open DevTools. In the utils here, most probably it's not gonna work. And let me actually try it myself by executing again the scraper. So if I execute the scraper, I will get an error saying command failed Google Chrome. That's because I don't have Google Chrome as a normal executable process. That basically means I cannot write Google/Chrome. Can I do Google? Is that Google Chrome? No, that's something else. In my case, I need to provide the path to the Google Chrome. So you can find it on Windows in a different place, but on macOS, the path to Google Chrome is Node. On macOS, the Chrome executable is this one. So let me take it and replace it here. So it's basically in the application, Google Chrome application, contents, macOS, Google Chrome. Now, if I'm gonna try again, Node scraper, we should see somewhere yes, right away here, DevTools, a new page opened. It opened the elements. And we see debugging connection was closed. That's because everything was already executed and we didn't even manage to see what happened. In scraper, if we go ahead and comment out the browser.close, after executing and after navigating to the example.com, the browser is gonna still be open so we can see what's happening there. So comment out this one temporarily and execute it again. This should open the DevTools. Our scraper should go to example.com. We should see the example domain home here, and it remains active so that we can inspect elements. Where is it? We can inspect elements as you would do in Google Chrome. You can check things so that we can know like what links to find, what buttons to press, and so on. You can also see the console and so on, the network. But probably the most important part is to have a visual representation of where did we land, what's happening, and how to find things that we need. We need that for the next step, because right now we have our scraper, we have our basic scraper, right? It connects using Puppeteer to the BrightData browser. It navigates to a page, it displays the HTML, and that's it. BrightData also has a way to solve CAPTCHAs automatically for you. So that's another benefit of using BrightData, because it unlocks different multiple websites that otherwise wouldn't be possible to do, or it would be very hard to do manually to solve all the CAPTCHAs and so on. Okay, next step. What's going to be the next step? To actually start implementing our scraper, the fun part. Let's see in our documentation. Yeah, as I was explaining before, web scraping is made up of two different stages. The first stage is to navigate and to interact with a website in order to bring it to the desired state. After you've done that, it goes into the parsing. The parsing is extracting the data from that page, from that website. So to explain it in our terms, the first step about interaction, as I said, is basically means going and navigating to the website, interacting with it to get to the desired state. For example, and it mimics a lot the way users interact. First step is going to be to, let's say, go to Skyscanner. And by the way, we're gonna scrape the website Skyscanner. You go to that website, and what do you do next? Well, you find the from airport, you press on it, you choose, for example, TFS. You go to the to airport and you write Madrid. Then you go to the departure, you select the date. The return, you select the return date. And after that, you press search. So these are all the interactions needed to be executed before we get the data that we need. After we press search, and after the things are loaded, we see a list of data. So here we still have to wait a bit for the data to load, but after that is done, the interaction step is finished because we navigated and we have a data on this page that we need to scrape. So the next step would be the parsing stage to go ahead, find all of these containers and extract the data that we need from the containers. So let's start with the interaction step and implement that. In some cases, that's exactly what you'd have to do. To go first to the home page, input something in the search, select some of the things, and then press search. We are lucky because Skyscanner has all of this data right here in the URL. So if I'm going to copy the URL from Skyscanner, and if I'm going to put it here somewhere, I'm going to comment out example URL. We're going to see that, and here it should be probably net or something else. We see that the data about the airport from, airport to, and the dates is part of a URL. So simply navigating to this URL, we navigate to the results page without having to interact a lot with the page. So that's going to help us a lot because we can save a lot of time by navigating and interacting by directly sending the right URL, which is not always possible. And with a real browser scraping, you can interact. So you have this option. That's the benefit. The date is here like 2 digits for the year, 2 digits for the month, and 2 digits for the date. Let's go ahead and take this URL, example URL, and instead of navigating to the example, let's navigate to it. But I'm going to, inside this main function, let's define the URL equal to this string. I'm going to put it here because later on this will be variable. This will be inputs. But now we can take this URL and we can say page go to URL. We can also change here from example to URL and what else. And that's it. Now we can go ahead and run the scraper again. This should open the DevTools. And we should see where our scraper is going. It goes to the actual page that we were interested from Tenerife to Madrid and the dates that we set there in the URL. And yeah, that's good. That's already a starting point. If we would start parsing it right now, It might not work because we are greeted with this privacy policy pop-up. So as a user, what we have to do is go ahead and press this OK button. But what we need to do is actually tell our scraper to do that for us, because we are automating this. So how do we do that? Well, we first of all go ahead and find some identification of this button in order to know how to find it and click on it. This is called, we're going to do that based on selectors, and the selectors are very similar to how you target a component when wanting to style it, like using ID or classes and so on. For us, the best way is if you find a unique identifier of something. For example, if I look into this code, and this is actually the hardest part of data scraping, to understand how to find elements in a way that is going to be very general, and it's going to work the same way even if the Skyscanner updates their class names and so on. Why I cannot zoom in a bit? Okay, I want to zoom in. It's weird. I cannot. Oh, for some reason my plus button is not working. So this way I can zoom in a little bit. So let's highlight the OK button, and this is the button, and as we can see, it's inside some divs. I think if we look all the way up till this div, we see that it has an ID. And as I said, the best thing is to find things by their ID. So we see that this is the div ID cookie banner. So if we find the element with ID cookie banner and then find the first button inside that element, we're gonna end up on the OK button, and then we can click on it. So to do that, let's go ahead and after we go to the URL, and even after these captchas and so on, what we want to do is close the privacy pop-up. Well, we know how to find it. We need to find the div with a cookie banner content. Or even where cookie banner root. But there is one with specifically for the content. I think it's better to take this cookie banner content ID, not for the whole root, because the whole root might be on the screen always. So using the page that we use to navigate to the URL, we can go ahead and use a locator method to find something by ID. And we saw that the ID is cookie banner. To say that this is an ID, we simply have to put a hashtag in front of it. And then we don't want the actual cookie banner content. We want the button from that container. And after we find it, we simply want to click on it. So we can call click here. And this is a asynchronous function because it looks for it and so on. So we need to put a wait. And the locator will also wait for the button to appear on the screen and only then click on it. So if we try to execute it again, let's see if it will actually find the button. If the pop-up disappears, which it did, it means that it found the button correctly. If it didn't, make sure that the IDs and the component names are the same. Here is a big disclaimer. When you're dealing with data scraping, in a lot of cases, your code depends on the code of a website that you are scraping. What do I mean by that? Now, I assume that there will be a component with ID cookie banner and inside it a button. If, for example, Skyscanner tomorrow will change something on their website, maybe we'll change the ID, maybe we'll change from a button to an A or something like that. In that case, my scraper will break and I will have to come back and update it. There is no way around it, and the best way to go around it is to understand how things are working and to try to build a very general scraper, not very specific. So a specific scraper would be, for example, if I would highlight a button, would be right-clicking here and saying copy selector. That would work right now. And if I'm going to look at this selector, it looks like this. So find an element with uproot ID, then the first div with a class, this one with div, and so on. So this is a very, it will work today, but it will most probably break in a week or so. Because look, Skyscanner are smart, and for all the classes that are human readable, like these flights, they view row, for all of these classes, we're adding a suffix at the end with some random digits. I believe that every time they build their website, this part is updated. So if you copy this selector now, it will work, but probably the next day it will stop working because the suffix of these classes will be different, or the structure of a website will be different. So I'm saying this because if you are following along this tutorial half a year or 2 years after we released the tutorial, make sure to double check all of these class names, IDs, and so on. I'm always trying to show you like where I'm taking them from, so you can go back and see if it's still the same or if it changed, and you also have to change how you parse and how you look for elements and content on the screen. With that being said, let's continue, because we are finished with the navigation. It was quite easy for us in this situation. All we have to do is open the browser, go to the URL, go to a predefined URL that already contains search information, and find the button for the cookie banner if you have one, and close it. The next step is going to be the parsing. It's the second step in the process of web scraping. And you can look through here, or you can actually open the Skyscanner in a new browser just for us to see what's going on there. I think it's going to be easier for us. Let's go ahead and inspect this page and think about how and what do we want to parse from this page. Well, we see a list of options. They are these cards that we see on the screen. And yeah, let's go ahead and look into the code that represents one of these cards. To do that, I'm gonna hover over this card without actually clicking it. So why it doesn't highlight? And what's that? It's weird. Inspect. I think because we have a DevTools open here. Where are the DevTools? No, it's okay. Let me open a incognito. For some reason, I cannot hover over elements. Accept. Let's inspect, and now, yes, now as you can see, if I enable this option, I can hover over elements and it highlights the part of the code of the HTML. So if I hover over one of these options, I need to make sure to hover over the whole container. So as you can see now, it's only half of a container, but from the code, I can go up the tree to the parent component. I can close it to make it more readable. And probably it's also the parent container. Basically go all the way up until until the parent is already something different. For example, this A is still the container. But if I look at the div, well, it's still the container. If I look at this div, it's still the container. If I look at this one is already different. So now we understand that the childs are all of the divs inside the flight results day view items. Because I don't need a lot of these divs, I can target and try to search for the link for the A tag based on this class flight ticket link and something at the end. So let's go ahead and from our code find all of these A elements. If I copy this class and if I press Command F or Control F, I'll be able to search by the class. And as you can see, we have 8 matches, meaning that there are 8 elements and I can go through all of them and understand that this is exactly what I need. It's specifically the options. It's not like any advertisements or anything else. It's only related to the options that I want to parse. So I think this is a very good handle based on what we can search. So I'm going to search for A's with basically, yeah. At the same time, let me open Puppeteer documentation. Probably not here. We have it here somewhere. And as you can see, the way to find elements is using this either $1 sign, which helps us using a query selector find elements. When it's $1 sign, this will find only one element. If it's $2 sign, this will find all elements, all items that match that selector. So let's go ahead and in our main function of our scraper.js, after we close the banner, the pop-up, the privacy pop-up, in the parsing part, let's go ahead and find these flights. So the flights or flight options equal to a wait page. And we're going to use the $sign because we want to find all the flight options that matches this selector. The selector, as we said, we're going to use the class name flight ticket link. So this is going to be the class name. And if you want to find by class name, what we can do is we can specify A and then class is equal to this one. And then close the bracket. So an element A Maybe you even don't have to specify it. That's really optional. But yeah, in this case, we're searching for a class, for a that has the class flight ticket link. Let's try to console log flights dot, how to debug to understand how many did it find. Flights dot length. I'm wondering what that will be. So let's run the scraper. It will open this here. I can go back and wait here in the terminal. Suffixes, yes, Steven, that's very right. There is this HTML that we don't actually need. We will parse them differently. So that messed up with my output, so I'm going to have to run it again. But I'm going to handle the suffixes in a moment. And let's see if it displays something. We need to see something other than 0. It's 11. That means that on our page, it found 11 items with a class flight tickets link and this suffix. And if we look in this view, yeah, that should be it, like 11 flights that you see here. Perfect. But as Steven said, and also as I mentioned before, we need to think about how to make it very general. As I said before, most probably this suffix is something that is generated and updated every time you refresh the page and is done specifically to prevent people from scraping. What we can do is we can say that the selector, we can specify find all A elements with a class that starts with flight ticket link. To specify this condition, after the class, we put a caret like this. This emphasize starts with, and now we can remove the suffix. Because and now if we run it again, we should still see the same 11 or maybe another number of flight tickets. But this time, our scraper will be a little bit more general and will avoid we'll target like only the beginning of a class here. Let's see if it still works. Yes, we have 11. Perfect. So because we have 11 flights, 11 elements, which basically are the link where this one. 11 elements like this. Let's go ahead and define a function that will receive an element like this with all of its children and parse the flight. To do that, let's scroll up and somewhere here, I don't need this anymore. Let's go ahead and define an async function called parse flight. We're going to receive a flight container or the flight component with all of its children. And let's now simply return, and it will parse it and return some data. Some of this data is going to be the price. So let's start with a hard-coded price like this. Now, for every flight that we found on the page, we need to call that parse flight function. So that means that flights dot, I'm thinking how to confuse you less. Well, because there are multiple flights, there are an array of flights, and we need for every single item from that array of flights to call and await the execution of this function. what we're gonna do is we're gonna say flights.map. We're gonna map through every flight here. And we are going to, for every single flight, basically flight, we're gonna call the function parse flight. When mapping, we are mapping from one data structure to another data structure. We're mapping from a list of flights to a list of responses from this parse flight function. The parse flight function is an async function. So that means that we are collecting here an array of promises. What we can do with this array of promises, I can show you that they are an array of promises by console logging them here. And you're going to see it's an array of 11 promises. We need to await the execution of every single promise in that array. So for that, we have a function called promise.all, and we send here an array of promises, and this will await until every single parse flight is executed. Now what you can do is simplify this by, instead of having a variable here, by sending this function right away here. We don't need this anymore. And also, actually here should have been like this: flight, parse flight, flight. And in this situation, we can also simplify this by, instead of declaring a function that will take the parameter and send it to the parse flight, we can right away send here parse flight. So yeah, I understand this might be a bit confusing if you are new to JavaScript. If you have experience with JavaScript, you probably are writing this syntax a lot of time. What we are doing here is we are mapping through a list of data, and we are calling an async function, and at the end we want to await the execution of all of those data, and actually at the end we should also store this in the data array that we can do console log data here, and the data will be the array with the result of all the function calls. Let's see that in action. It will make more sense. Hello, Dana. How are you doing? So what I'm expecting to see is an array with 11 objects, all of them having the price field with this price. And that's exactly what we see here. An array with, for every single item on our website, we have one object. Now, instead of getting the hard-coded price, let's go ahead and find the value using Puppeteer and a selector. So, because this flight is a reference to a component on the page, we can use it to further search things there. For example, if we want to find the price, first of all, let's look at the page and see how we might be able to find the price. Well, first of all, I'm going to hover over this price and see if there is any ID or class that is distinguishable to that. We see that this is a span with some text classes, which most probably is only for styling the text. It doesn't say anything about the price, and most probably it's used in other places as well. But if I look at the div above, we see price, main price container. And I think this is a class that represents this price. So let's copy the class, price, main price container. And in the parse flight, we're going to use flight dot find like this, and we're going to find by the selector. The selector is going to be this class. But remember, when we want to search by the class, we need this parentheses we need to say class, and we're going to say that it starts with this string. And here we're going to put the class, and we should remove the suffix. We want to find the component inside the flight div with a class price main price container. And then what we can do, this is going to be actually the price element. To get the actual price based on the element, we have to evaluate a function. I think it's going to be price.eval. Let me see. Let's go to Puppeteer dashboard documentation. And for example, this one will return the element handle. And from element handle, how do we, I think it's evaluate. Well, I wanted to do the long way and then the short way, but actually, I'm going to show you the short way right away. So if the $sign function is finding an element by a selector and returning the element handle, basically a reference to that element that we can later use to search something else, the $sign eval function will first do the same as $sign, find the element, and after that we'll evaluate, basically we'll execute a function that we define, and at the end it will give us the return statement from the function. So what we can do with that is, it's going to be the price. Instead of only finding the element, we're gonna find the element and then evaluate a function. The function is going to be the second parameter that we send here that will receive the element, basically the element, and we can take the text content of that element. Now, if I'm going to put the price in this object that we return, let's go ahead and execute the script one more time. 1 second. And we see promise pending. Why? Because this eval is actually an async function and we forgot to do a wait here. Let's go ahead and do it again. And we see the prices that were parsed. The first one is 84. If I look here, it's indeed 84. So it correctly parsed the price. And usually when you get the text content, I also advise to trim the text. And trimming is basically removing the white space from the beginning and the end. And sometimes there will be some unexpected spaces. So that's how simple it was to parse and scrape the price of all the flights. So right away we have scraped some information from Skyscanner using Puppeteer through BrightData's browser. Perfect, but we're not done yet. This is just the beginning. We scraped one piece of data. Now we need to scrape the rest of the data that we need to power our application. So the rest of the data to power our application. The data that I'm interested in, if you remember the application, is the information about the outgoing flight and the return flight. So that information, if we look in the Skyscanner, these are the two rows that we see here on the screen. So how do we find these rows? Let me think about that. If I'm gonna select one of these rows here, this is not the row. Let's look at the row. This is the row. And this one. No. What's this? Some kind of logo container. Okay. This is still the row. I'm gonna close it. And that means that I found the parent container that has two childs. First row and second row. That means that what we are interested in is in finding this div and taking the child. So finding the parent and taking the child rows for the two options that we have. The parent container has a very distinguishable class, upper ticket body legs container. Not sure why we called it like this, but I believe it's going to be what we are interested in. I mean, I believe it's not going to change or something like that. And if I copy this class now, we can go ahead and inside our price flight, let's go ahead and do a wait flight. We need to find all the divs based on the next selector. First of all, we need to find the div with the class upper ticket body that we found here, the parent one. So we know that to find by class, we need the brackets, class, and then starts with the class that we found here, upper ticket body legs container. But we don't need to find the parent. What we need is to find the direct children. So with this syntax, we're gonna say find all the divs that are the direct child of a component with the class starting with upper ticket body legs container. Okay, that sounds complicated, but yeah, like step by step, if you dissect it, like it makes sense. Now, in order for us to understand, maybe we can do const result. Let's do console log result dot length, just to see if length is 2, that means that we found the divs correctly. If it's anything else, probably that's not what we are looking for, and we need to double check the classes, IDs, and so on. $11, and then we have 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. That means that for every single flight, it found two directions, back and forth. That's good. That means that we found it correctly. And if we look at the page, these two are the child divs of the upper ticket body. This div and this div. Now our goal is going to be to parse them. And because they have the same structure with time, duration, and so on, what we can do is we can define a function that will parse a route. So parse route. We're going to receive a div here, and we can return also something dummy initially. For example, the route will be airline, I don't know, Ryanair. I don't even know how it's spelled. Maybe like this. Now we're gonna call this parse route function for both results. But because we know that the results is an array of always 2 elements, we can destructure them right away like this. To and from. or to div and from div, the route to and the route from. Now, inside the data that we're gonna parse for the flight, we can say the to is going to be await parse route to div, and the from is going to be await parse route from div. And now we should see, besides the price, we should see the to and from, which should only have an airline at the moment, and a hard-coded airline. So we see that for every option, yes, we have a price and we have two objects, the route to and the route from with airline, and that's it. Nice. So our parse flight function, I think at the moment is ready. Now we need to parse the route to actually parse it from the div. And I think I'm going to take the code from our guide because it's a little bit more, where is it? Parse routes. Here is the parse route. It has a little bit more information, but you saw the process that we did. Or should we do it together? Yeah, I think we can do it together. So in the parse route, we are interested in the following information: the airline that we are going with, the depart at, which is the time that we are going to depart, like this, the arrive at, for example, 800, and also how long is the duration of a flight. Let's start with these options, like 2 hours or something like that. Now let's think how we can get this information. Starting with the let's do the airline at the end. Let's start with the depart at time. We're gonna go ahead and look at the HTML of Skyscanner. We're gonna hover over the departure time here, and what do we see? We see that this is a span with a class, the same kind of BPK text, which most probably is not something that identifies a time. It's something that provides some styles to a text. Let's look upwards if we find something that identifies the departure time. I find this one, leg info route partial depart. If I close it, we see that there are 3 columns: the route depart, at the end the route arrive, and in the middle the stops. I think that's exactly what we need. So let's go ahead and copy this class, leg info route partial depart, and let's find the airline, I don't know, span equal await. We're gonna use the div to find an element with the class that starts with leg info route partial depart and without this at the end. But we don't want to find the parent div, because we will find this div. What we want to do is find probably the span inside the span. The first span, because the second one is going to be about the airport. So let's find the first span. And yeah, basically what I want to do is the same as here, like evaluate. And I was looking for this function, I couldn't find, but here I remembered it. So the airline name is going to be equal to airline span, which is a reference to a component, and we're gonna conditionally call the evaluate only if it found it, because I'm gonna show you in a moment, because not I said to start working with a departure, and then I started working with the airline. Wait a second. This is depart at sorry, my bad. Depart at, we found the span, and we need to take the text content. So we need to evaluate a function, not only find it. So I'm gonna do eval here, and the element that we found, simply call element.textContent.trim. Let's just double check if this works by actually sending the depart at back. Hello, Alexander. Come on. What I'm interested in is seeing depart at with actual data. So yeah, I think it works. The first one is departing at 17. Yes. The second one is at 650. 650. Yes, that means that we correctly found the span inside the component for the departure information, and we took the depart at field. Okay, let's copy paste this part, because the arrive at is very similar to this. The only thing that is different is that instead of depart is arrive with double R. You can double check that by inspecting this. You have a first route depart at the end, and here is route arrive. And it has the same structure with a span inside it, so it's gonna work like this. Now for the duration. The duration as well is gonna be similar to this. The only thing is that the class name is called leg info stops container. So let's go ahead and copy paste this code. We're gonna have duration, and the class that we are looking for is going to be leg info stops container. If I highlight, this is the middle, the center part. I'm gonna look for this one, and if I look, it's also the first span inside this, not the second, even so on. So I can take it from there, take the text content, and use it as the duration. So these three, the depart, arrive, and duration, are done. Now about the airline. The small challenge about the airline, and I'm gonna do it here at the top. The small challenge about the airline is that some airlines have an image, as you can see here. No, it's not even this one. There is a div with image, but some of them, for example, Ryanair plus Iberia, this is just a simple span. The component that we are gonna look for is the logo image container. So let's go ahead and first look for the airline that does not have an image, they have a span. So airline span equal to await div dot, we're gonna find by this class. Class should start with logo image container. And inside this, we need the span. But sometimes this will be empty in case there is only the logo. Not sure where that would be the case, but in some cases this would be empty. So that's why I'm not evaluating here right away, but I'm taking the reference to that span, and then I'm gonna be able to check. I'm gonna be able to check airline equal airline span, conditionally calling the evaluate function here. And I'm gonna take the element and do what? Element.text content.trim. And we also should await here. So let's see if we have any success with this one. And then we're gonna handle the images as well. Love your work. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Prashad. Appreciate that. So let's see what's happening. Airline, undefined, Ryanair. Undefined, Ryanair, undefined, and so on. So these which are undefined, they have an image and they don't have this span that we provided. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say if airline is undefined, if we couldn't parse it from the span, then we will parse it from the image. So airline image is equal to a weight. Based on the same div, we're gonna look for an image with the class, well, basically the same class, but instead of a span, we're gonna look for an image. Now, we're gonna put it into the same variable airline, so for that reason I need to make it a let, not a const. Airline is equal to, from the image, we want to evaluate, we want to take what? In cases of a span, we took the text content, which is the content inside the span. In cases of an image, what we can do, where is the image? In cases of an image, we see the alt attribute shows the name of a company. So let's go ahead and do el.alt .trim. So if we couldn't find it from a span, then we can look for it in an image. Now the ones we find defined, I hope will be scraped correctly. Come on, let's go. It's still undefined. Airline, it's still undefined. Why is that? So if, because I forgot to put if airline is undefined, I need to do if it's different than airline, then look for the image. My bad. So it goes here automatically, it closes the pop-up, it parses and fetches all the data, and right here we should see, yes, the airline is populated for all the items, both for items with text and images as well. So guys, that's everything for our scraper. What we managed to do so far is create a scraper that will that will use Puppeteer to open a browser and interact with a browser. The interaction that we have created is to go to a website that we need data from, in this case Skyscanner, and after that parse the information that we need from that website. With Puppeteer we can interact with the browser because this is we can connect to an actual browser, and in this case we used BrightData, the sponsor of today's video, to connect to a browser that is running on top of BrightData's proxy network, and this way every time we connect we get a different IP, we are protected from anti-scrapers bots, and we can scale our data scraper job to run multiple times and to be able to go ahead and get this data without being blocked. This scraping browser of course has a lot of other features, and I highly encourage you to go ahead and look at it and sign up. Use the $15 free credits that you can get by following the link in the description, and have a look and explore the other benefits of scraping browser, because I only showed you how you can connect to it, but you can also solve CAPTCHAs automatically. Use the proxy network, unblock the websites, browse, and so on. But again, this is only one solution from BrightData, and if you have any projects related to data, related to getting information, getting structured data from the web, think about BrightData, and most probably they will have a solution that will help you with your current project. Thank you very much, BrightData, for sponsoring the tutorial, but we are not ready yet, guys. It sounds like an outro, but it's not. We still have a lot of things to do. Actually, not a lot of things. What we want to do is to connect our scraper, the data that we get from the scraper, connect it with our mobile application. In order to do that, we cannot simply call a function on our notJust backend. Like, they are two different projects. We need to create a very simple API that we can interact from our React Native application, and the API will run the scraper. So the API that we're going to create, everything of course is in the step-by-step guide, but I'm going to do it here with you. We're going to use Express, which is a library that helps us create REST APIs, handle requests. So all we have to do is to install Express and save it. In package.json, we will see that we have a new dependencies Express, and this is in our backend, by the way. It's not in our React Native application. Now that we have Express, let's go ahead and create the index.js file that will be the entry point of our API. If you go ahead and copy this code, this is the getting, like the hello world of Express. I'm not gonna write it manually because it's quite simple. All it does is it registers a get endpoint, and whenever the users will go to the root, to the slash, it will simply send the hello world. After that, it starts the server, it listens on a port, and we will be able to interact. Let's see it in action, shall we? Let's go ahead and package.json, and let's add a script called dev that will execute node and index.js. Using node index.js will run this server, but you can also add a watch option to the node to restart the server every time we change the index. It's going to help us easier develop the API. Now let's open the terminal and let's go ahead and do npm run dev to execute this script. If I do that, we see example app listening on port 3000. If I'm going to go ahead and go to localhost 3000, as you can see, we see the hello world, because that's what we send back from this API endpoint. Now, if what we need is to register a new API endpoint that will help us search flights or will help us run the scraper. To do that, I'm going to do up.get because it's going to be easier for us if we start with a GET request. The endpoint is going to be /search. And as well, we're going to receive information about the request and the response. And here, what we're going to do is, I don't know, response.send some data in an array form, right? Now, maybe here we're going to have like information about prices and so on, about flights. If we look here, we see that notJust automatically restarted my server, and I can go to our browser, and instead of going to localhost port 3000, I'm also going to attach /search because search, not search, because that's our endpoint that we registered in the backend. I have a plugin that automatically parses this, but you should see something like this, like a raw JSON object. Okay, that's good, but how do we send data? How do we send parameters to this endpoint? We can do that by adding at the end of a URL search parameters. We do that using the question mark. I think this is very error prone. And what I'm gonna actually do is I'm gonna copy the URL from our guide. And you can do that as well. Go ahead and copy it from here. As you can see, it goes to the /search. And after that, after the question mark, it adds search parameters. The from, the to, departure date, and return date. These are going to be helpful for us to send dynamic parameters to our scraper. Copy this URL and go ahead and go there. If you see the same data as we saw before, everything is working perfectly. But now we are sending also some search parameters. How do we get this information here in our notJust backend? Well, we can do that from our request. Let's do console log request.query. And if we execute this request one more time, we're going to see the object with all the search request parameters from, to, departure date, and return date. Exactly what we are sending here through the URL. Okay, that's good. So that means that here we need to basically call the scraper, execute it, and then return the data. Let's go ahead in the scraper and think about what if we need to do any changes. Any changes. Well, first of all, make sure to go back and close the browser. Uncomment the await browser close because we don't want to leave a browser open. That will consume resources, and it's no bueno. Close the browser after you're finished with scraping. Then I don't want to call the main function as soon as I import or execute the scraper.js. We had this because we wanted to run it from the console. Now we're going to run it from the API. So make sure to remove this from here. Now I also want to change from main to scrape flights to be more descriptive. And we can receive here parameters like from, to, depart date, and return date. Remind me to still come back here and dynamically replace them here, but I want to go ahead and take the scrape flights and at the end of a file do module.export and export this function from the file. Back in our index.js, in our API, we can import require scraper, and we're gonna import scrape flights, and I can do it at the top here. Now all we have to do is do const data equals scrape flights and send there the request dot query. No, we need to send there 4 variables. So from the request dot query, I'm gonna take the from to depart date and return date, and I'm gonna send them as function parameters to the scrape flights. Now I can do request send, and instead of this array, I'm gonna send the data. And what else? Yeah, it's still not ready. So back to the scraper. I will also want to, I don't want to connect to the dev tools in production. Or no, let's connect for a moment until we are sure that everything is working correctly. What I want to do is actually return the data from this array, from this file, from this function. So after we get the data, I don't even need to console log. I will do return data. Let's see. Our API is still running. All we have to do is go here and press execute. We see something. The result showed up right away, but the parsing didn't happen yet. That means that we forgot to await something. And we forgot to await the execution of scrape flights. Let's go ahead and do await. That means that this should be async. And we should try it again. Let's press execute. It will open the dev tools, which are only temporary for us in development. If everything is working fine, we're gonna comment out and remove the dev tools for it to even work faster and to consume less resources. You see, while the scraper is running, we still see the loading state. And after it finished, we see the data that it managed to scrape. Wow. You should see it in a different format, maybe like this. I have this Chrome extension that automatically parses them, but that means that we can send a request to our API, a simple GET request. Our API will trigger the scraper, will get the data, and will give us back the data as a JSON format. In a way, from the front-end perspective, we don't even care that there is a scraper. We simply send a request to our backend, we wait for a bit, and then we get it back as a JSON, and that's it. So that's the benefit of putting like our scraper behind a simple REST API that will handle all of this. But as I said, we need to make sure that we are using the inputs for the actual search. So it's going to be very simple. We will transform from a normal string to a template string with backticks here, and we're going to replace the parts that should be variable with our variables. So for example, the first here, the TFS, should be replaced with the variable from. The second, MAD, should be replaced with to. The depart date should go here. Depart date. And the return date as well here. This way, you can search for, let's search for something from USA. I don't know, USA airport codes. Tell me some ATL and LAX. LAX I know as well. So from LAX to what? ATL. Let's search, and if it works, I'm gonna understand that because it's gonna have like different airlines and so on. But because we have a DevTools, we will see that it's actually searching for Los Angeles and Atlanta. It closed the browser, and back in our local host, it failed for some reason. I think I saw the error there. I don't think is Skyscanner working in USA. Well, anyway, if I want to debug that, I will comment out this browser close, and I will do this again, just to see maybe why that's happening. Yeah, with data scraping, like you need a lot of patience and to see and to fix a lot of like small issues like this. Now it works. I remember the previous time I was looking and the prices were not displayed. There was something with the prices, but now yeah, it looks like it worked. Spirit Airlines, the price, and so on. All of them are Spirit Airlines. Anyway, it worked, but in a situation it failed, and in that case our whole API failed. What we can do better is send the error message here and make our API a little bit more error prone, because scrape flights sometimes can fail. So for that reason, I'm gonna do a try here. We're gonna do a try and respond here, but in the catch, like if something happened with scrape flights, we can return the status code 500, which stands for a server error. We will send an error like failed to scrape. And we can also add some data validation, because if this information will not be provided, we don't want to run the scraper. It's not going to make sense. So for that reason, I can do here, if either from is undefined, or to is undefined, or departure date is undefined, or return date is undefined. If either of them is undefined, I want to respond the status code 400, which stands for bad request, and I will send the inputs are missing, and I will return. I will stop here even. And this way, for example, if I will forget to add the date and I will run, we see inputs are missing. Or if something bad happens with the scraper, it's not gonna crash our server, but return them a better error message. And now that it works, I restarted the server. Yes, now it works. Everything is perfect. We can go to our scraper and make sure that we have this browser closed. And I will also go ahead and comment out the DevTools. I don't want in production to open the DevTools. I will leave it like this, just to do everything behind the scenes and only give me the data that I'm interested in. And with that being said, our API and scraper is ready. And the last step, the actual last step, is to connect it with our React Native application. And simply using the fetch API, we can go ahead and fetch or send a GET request to our API and get the data. Yeah, let's implement that together. So back, now we are moving to our client side, to our React application. Here, here in our source, let's go ahead and create a new folder called services. And we're going to call it API, a new file called api.js. This api.js will help us interact with our API. So let's export a function from here that will fetch or search flights. The function is going to be called search flights. So export async function search flights, and this function search like this, this function will receive an object with all the parameters from, to, depart, date, and return date. All the options that we have. Let's go ahead and simply return from here an object with data and that initially has an empty array. We're going to come back to implement the actual fetching, but I want to connect our API function with the app.js. In app.js, let's go ahead and import search flights from our source services API. In the on search, when the user presses that search, let's go ahead and call the search flights function, and we're going to send the data there, the data that we receive here. And we can go ahead and do console log response. The response, from the response, we're going to return an object with data, so we can do set items response.data. Now, if I'm going to press on the search, it's empty because that's what we are returning here, an empty array. Now, what we have to do here in this function is send a GET request, similarly to how we sent it from our search, to how we sent it from our browser to the local host, to basically a GET request to our API with the variables from, to, depart, and so on. So let's go ahead and create the URL of our backend. This URL later can change because you most probably will host it somewhere, but for now it's at localhost, then port 3000. And I think it should also have HTTP like this. Now I'm gonna simply take this URL from here and using a try catch, inside a try catch, because sometimes things go wrong with network requests and so on, I'm going to use the fetch API, which is available in our runtime. We don't have to install anything. And let's initially send the fetch to the URL that we copied from the browser without dynamic parameters, just straight like this. And let's go ahead and take the response equal await fetch. Now we can do console log response. Let's go ahead, and to trigger this, all we have to do is press search and probably wait. We're gonna have to wait as long as our backend is scraping, so it should take around 20 seconds. And then we should see the response here. Yes, we see the response with data empty. No, the data is not from here. The data is somewhere in this response. How do we get that? Is by getting the JSON. So what we can do here is return the object with data, and I'm gonna take it from response.json, but this is an async function, so we need to do wait. Now if everything is working fine, we should actually see the results in down below here. All right, here they are, coming straight from our backend, scraped from Skyscanner, freshly scraped. Okay, now I will just add a couple of handling error messages. For example, if the response status is anything else than 200, that means that there will be no data there. There was a problem, an error with the request. So instead of returning the data, I'm gonna return an error saying, I don't know, failed to search. And we can probably also return an data with empty array like this. If response is not that, we're gonna return this. Otherwise, we're gonna return this. And in the catch, like if something actually bad happens there, I can return also like the error. Network error. Now, before we move on, let's go ahead and compose this URL that we want to send the request to using the data that we have. First of all, the first part of a URL, this is going to be the dynamic part. It will depend where your backend is hosted. Now it's on localhost, later it can be hosted on a remote server, so that's why we're gonna keep it in a variable at the top. And here, first of all, I will do backticks to be able to replace parts of the strings with variables, and the first part here is going to be replaced with URL like this. Now we're gonna do the same with the rest. For example, the from variable, instead of hard coding it here, we're gonna replace it with from. The to, we're gonna replace it with to. Depart date, as you might guessed, depart date, and return date, return date. Now everything should come from the actual form here. So if I'm gonna do how did we do that? LAX to ATL for Atlanta? I don't know, maybe. And from maybe 8th to 15th. Search. Let's see if it will work. In our app.js, yeah. The next step is going to be to add some loading states, reset the state, and so on. In Android, the date picker is not working. That's weird. And yeah, for some reason it didn't work here. But if I will search for TFS to Madrid, search. Oh, I know why. Let's console log this URL now. For example, here, console log the URL that we created. If I'm gonna press search, you're gonna see the URL, and you see that the departure date and the return date, they are not in the format that we are interested in. The format that we have to send these dates are 2 digits for the year, 2 digits for the month, and 2 digits for the date. The easiest way to parse and properly format this date is going to be using an external library. So let's go ahead and install it using npx expo. Install day.js. Day.js is a library that we can use to handle dates and work with them. And I'm gonna use it to format in our URL the departure date and the return date. So for the departure date, let's do let's first import day.js from day.js. And here, instead of departure date, I'm going to transform it to a day.js first. And after that, do .format. And the format is going to be capital YY for double digits of year, then capital MM for double digits of month, and capital DD for double digits of day. And we should do the same for the return date. But after you copy it, make sure to change to return date. Now, if I'm gonna search again, hopefully it's gonna work because now the dates are in the right format. Watching notJust.Dev while taking dinner. Hopefully during the weekend, you're gonna follow this tutorial along slowly at your own pace and implement it yourself. I think we already see answers. Perfect. Well, the last step here in the one search is to add a loading indicator. So I'm gonna do loading and is loading here. Initially it's gonna be false, and we set the loading to true whenever we start the search process. So set loading. Not is loading, but set loading to true. And when we finish everything, we set loading to false. Another thing that we can do is whenever we press again, I don't want to see the previous results. So when we search, I want to reset the items to an empty array. And with this, having this loading, we can go ahead and also render something on the screen. For example, between the search form and the flat list, we can conditionally render a loading indicator if loading is true. We can do that using the AND operator, and we can have a view that has a activity indicator. Activity indicator is a simple spinner that was imported from React Native. And activity indicator, you can also have a text here saying searching for the best prices. Make sure to import the text as well. And just like this, whenever we will press on the search application, like this, whenever we will actually search Madrid TFS, search, we're gonna see the loading indicator and the text. You can style it better, you can show like some animation, because usually the scrapers, they take some time. Like this is part of a process to go there and find data. So for that reason, you might show a better loading indicator, a more fun indicator. To yeah, here it is. All the data is exactly from Skyscanner if I'm gonna look for that, and everything is here in our mobile application. So git add fetch flight prices from the backend. All right, guys, so that was the final thing that connected everything together that we have created so far. So to recap everything that we have done is we created the client-side mobile application that will help us search for the best flight deals. Then using Puppeteer inside Node.js, we have connected through BrightData to a browser and scraped a website like Skyscanner. We went there, we searched for the flights that the user will need. We then parsed the HTML, we found the right data, we structured it in a way that is going to be easy for us to consume, and we exported it, or we made it available through a REST API. Lastly, that we have done just now, we integrated our mobile application with our REST API to fetch this information, and behind the scenes, everything is happening there. This is just the beginning of this project. There are a lot of things that you can improve on this project. In the step-by-step guide, I left there some ideas, but one idea that but some of the good ideas that you can continue working on this application, because I really believe that you can create a business or a startup out of price aggregators, out of comparing prices. If we talk specifically about, wait a second. All right. If we talk specifically about flight price comparisons, a good next point would be to scrape not only Skyscanner but other websites as well, like Kayak, or even directly airlines. Sometimes you can find better deals directly on the airlines. An idea that you can think about is scraping from the same website but from different countries. This is a trick that airlines are doing. So if they are showing different prices in different countries, so what you can do is go to the same Ryanair website from all the countries from Europe and find the country with the lowest price, and then display that to the user. That would be something even better than Skyscanner, because Skyscanner only scans from one location. You could do that from multiple locations. Of course, you can scrape more information, not only what we have scraped today, but additional information like how many stops there are, how long is the flight, I don't know, you name it. I think the most important ones we scrape right now, but you can always get more. You can implement like some sorting methods for the cheapest or the fastest flight, depending on the user preference, and quite an advanced feature would be to implement pricing alerts. This would make this application very useful, because if I know that during the Christmas holidays, I'm gonna go back to my home country in Moldova. What I can do is I can go to this application, search a flight from Tenerife to Moldova, and set a pricing alert to notify me when the price drops below a threshold or when a better deal is found. So this way I can get the best deal for that flight. Technically, what you're gonna do is whenever the user saves this alert, you're gonna have to save this information somewhere in your database. Like, hey, this user wants to know updates about this flight, basically from this destination, this dates, and so on. Then you're gonna have to create a cron job that will schedule the execution of a scraper over time, like maybe every day or a couple of times a day. We'll run the scraper and we'll return the data. After that, your API can decide like, hey, if this is a better deal, I can send an email or I can send a push notification. That would be like really awesome. And if you do that, make sure to tag me on the social media, and I would be happy to see you guys from the community continuing this project and implementing more features. Also, this shouldn't stop at flight prices. There are so many things out there that you can compare. You can compare prices for products. For example, if you're looking to buy an iPhone, where is it better? On Amazon or on Walmart or something like that. You can do this for hotels, if we're talking about like travel industry, for car rentals, for real estate deals. Maybe you want to look for the price drops in real estate. E-commerce products. There are so many things where data scraping, where you can build a business out of scraping the internet, scraping the right data, putting it together into for analytical purposes or for taking decisions, finding like the best deals, finding when things change, and so on. So feel free to get creative with this and see where it can take you. And whenever you have to work with data scraping, BrightData is here to help you, because without BrightData, you will very soon reach the limit of being blocked by the websites, getting through some challenges like CAPTCHAs that websites are implementing to protect against scraping. But with BrightData and their huge network of proxies, you can overcome this and scrape the internet, scrape the web, get the data that you need. And you can do that. You can do that with also $50 free credits following the link in the description below. Thank you very much, BrightData, for sponsoring this video, for making it possible. It was a real challenge for me, and it was so exciting to get back on data scraping. I remember like 5 or 7 years ago, I was very much into data scraping. I was trying to do a lot of things, but it was always challenging. You will always go through problems like being blocked and so on. And I wish I knew about BrightData back then. It would have made the process much easier. So yeah, if you have any questions, guys, feel free to let me know. You can leave them down in the comments below. I'm gonna try to help you. And all of the information from this tutorial, like the source code and so on, I'll put a link in the description below, and on our guide, on our website. I'll keep it up to date. If you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of content prepared for the near future. We're going live every single Friday. We're building exciting mobile applications, and if you are on this track, I'm pretty sure you'll love the content that we have prepared for you. So yeah, subscribe to the channel. Only 1% of you watching right now are subscribed, and this is from the analytics. So it took me more than 2 weeks to prepare this tutorial. It will take you literally 2 seconds to pause the video, subscribe, and enjoy it. All right, that was it. Thank you very much, guys. Have a nice weekend ahead. Bye-bye.